We are talking about the MakeHaven Brother Electroknit KH-930 today and how to set it up and use it. So you're going to come in, take off the cover. There's two flip locks on the back. The cover comes off. And here's where you're going to find the knitting carriage, the mast, and this is the carriage if you're going to do lace work, which we will get into in another video. So you're going to unlock it, take out. This is for the carriage. Comes over here, and there are two finger screws to tighten down with your fingers. Then you're going to take the mast and you're going to open it up until it clicks, and then open it up again until it clicks. I can get it to click and click. And I like to think of it as the squirrel from Ice Age. So like if this is his eyeball and this is his nose and these are his antenna, and he's going to look at you when you put it in the machine. It goes in the hole right there, and you can lift up the handle and you're ready to knit. For basic knitting settings, you want to have it on N for normal, N for normal, and none of the buttons pushed in. And this will be your tension guide. And you can turn this knob from 0, the tightest tension, to 10, the loosest tension. When you're knitting on a knitting machine, you don't want to use hand knitting yarn. You want to use cone yarn. It comes with a waxy coating still on it that helps it run through the machine. You also want to use a very fine yarn. So most hand knitting yarns are going to be a little too heavy to run through the machine. Hand knitting numbers and machine knitting numbers are different for yarn. So this would be considered a lace weight in hand knitting. But I think in machine knitting yarn, it's all done by weight of the cone. So there's a whole math formula that you can Google about cone yarn and how much it weighs and what that means. So you're going to take your yarn and go in your between two tension discs right here. And then you're going to go through one loop and through the antenna. So your yarn is now ready to start knitting with. And I like to sit when I knit. So we're going to come down here. There's a lot of tools that go along with the knitting machine, and this is just some of them. These are all needle selectors, and they come in different varieties. So this one will select every 4th needle. This one will select every 5th needle. This one is every other needle and all the needles at once. This is every other needle and then every 2 needles. So we're going to use every other needle and all the needles at once for this. Yeah, so casting on is going to be the first row of stitching that you do, and it's a setup row for whatever piece of material that you're making. So that first set of stitches isn't going to be every needle that you choose. You're just going to choose every other needle, which this handy little ruler will do for you. So we're going to choose every other needle, and we want our outside needles that we're going to use to be chosen for our cast on. So if you have a certain number of needles, you want to choose your first and last needle to be the ones for your first row. So you've chosen every other needle. You're going to take your yarn and you're going to bring it to your carriage. And there's a little lever right here. And you're going to put your yarn in the A slot of the carriage. So it goes all the way in, and then you close this little lever, and your yarn is safely tucked in the A slot. It's generally a good idea to cast on a little bit looser than you would necessarily be doing your whole project, just to give you a little room to work with. So we're going to cast this on at an 8 tension, even if we're going to have a tighter tension as we go through our project. You're going to have it select every other needle, and then you're going to take one of the combs, and it's got little hooks on the edge, and you're going to make sure your yarn is on the outside, and you're going to hang this so that it catches all of your yarn that you've knit so far. And then you're going to take weights that are appropriate for the size that you're doing. If you're casting on for the whole bed, you might want to use slightly heavier weights. There's different versions of them in here. You can hook this on and hang one of these weights in the hole, or these have little teeth on them, and you can hang those on the comb. So now that you've got every other needle selected, you're going to want to select every needle and start knitting. A lot of times you'll have trouble. You want to make sure that you're not getting loops on the end of your project. You want to make sure that this string isn't getting caught on anything. There's usually a little hook there that you can put your string on. So as an example, this is an 8 tension. We're going to go down to a 3 so you can see. So this will be the back side of your project. This is the purl side, and you can see that an 8 tension will give you a little bit of space in there, and then as you get smaller in the numbers, the tension of the knitting gets tighter. So that's casting on. To cast off, you're going to want to do your last 2 rows at the highest tension you can. So I put it on 10 just to give you enough room to be able to manipulate those stitches off. So I'm going to do those 3 rows, and now we're going to be able to cast off. I'm going to take my yarn out. And for this, you're going to want the hook tool, and it's basically a needle from the machine. It's got a little latch on here, the latch tool, and it's got a handle so that it's easy to hold. And you're going to cast off in a similar way to when you hand knit, where you take one stitch and you pull it through and hook it through the next one and pull it through and hook it through the next one and pull it through. It's might be sort of difficult to see here, but you can find a lot of videos online and find one that makes sense to you and that explains it in a way that makes sense to you. And again, there's multiple different ways that you can cast off. So I'm going to take this one, I'm going to put my latch tool on there. Oops, I'm going to start with this on the outside. I'm going to put my latch tool on there. I'm going to pull this through that stitch. So now I'm going to wind this from the left. And as it comes through, that latch is going to close and it's going to make a hook. And then I'm going to take, one came off. I'm going to take the next stitch. I'm going to hook this on here. I'm going to pull it through. I'm going to wrap it around, and then I'm going to pull it through. And part of the trick is you want to hook it on, pull it so that the yarn goes past the gate on the machine hook. And then when you go when you pull this one through, it should go all the way through. Put it on there, and then pull it through. Go. Pull these both through, wrap it around, pull it through both stitches. On, wrap it around, pull it through both stitches. Put it on, pull it through, put it on there, and then pull it through both stitches. And you're going to do that for the remainder of the rows. All the way through, pull it through, around, and pull it through. And it does take a little practice and a little hand-eye coordination. If you lose a stitch, which is going to happen at some point, especially when you're practicing, just get it back on your needle. If you need to use another latch tool, you can get it from behind. And just push it up and try and grab it. Yeah, I'm not going to get that back. So it's very important to practice casting off on a practice piece before you start something that you're really trying to finish and putting a lot of work into, because if you get to this point and you're casting off and you lose a few stitches and you can't get them back, you can repair this, but it's going to take time and patience. The other option you have to cast off is if you need live edge stitches, you're making a sweater or you're making something where you want to knit two pieces together afterwards, you also have the option of, we're going to take these off, just to remove your project. If you run the carriage back over, it will take everything off as live stitches, and you can have those live stitches there, and you can come back later and hook them back on or knit them to another piece of the project that you're working on. So you're going to transfer your stitch onto your latch tool, pull it through, wrap it around inside your gate pegs, and pull the yarn through. Go to your next stitch, transfer it onto your latch tool, wrap your yarn around, pull it through. Transfer it onto the, wrap it around, and pull it through. Transfer it onto your latch tool, wrap it around, pull it through. And as I'm going, I'm keeping my yarn on the gate pegs so that all of my knitting doesn't fall off and hit the floor. You don't have to do it that way, but I find it much more easy to control if you do. Wrap it around, pull it through. Wrap it around, pull it through. Wrap it around, pull it through. And as I go on to the next stitch, I'm holding the last one with my hand, wrapping it around, and then when I tighten, both of those loops close, holding it with my finger, looping it through, wrapping it around, holding it with my finger, looping it through, wrapping it around. When you get to your last stitch, you're going to go through your last stitch, pull your yarn all the way through, and then rip it or cut it off and keep pulling that loop all the way through, and that'll secure your end. And at that point, you can pull off all of your knitting and your stitches are closed on this side. And you can take your knitting off your weights, and this will be your right side or your knit side of your knitting, and this will be your purl side. The other thing that we're going to talk about is we have blocking mats for when you're finished with your project. So what you're able to do is take these mats and take your project. There's a set of pins in here somewhere. And you take your finished piece and you can either get it completely soaking, you can get it wet with a mister, you can sort of do whatever you want to clean it if you're going to do that. And then you take your pins and you pin it in the shape that you want your project to be while it's still damp. And you never want to wring anything that's wet in knitting because it's going to stretch out your stitches and cause it to warp. If you need to take a lot of the moisture out, you can roll it up in a towel and just squeeze it in the towel, and that'll take out a lot of moisture for you. But you want to take it and then pin it down while it's still damp. and leave it out to dry. And once it dries, it will maintain more of this shape. And you can take out some of the curling. You can stretch it to be larger if you're trying to achieve on the bottom of a sweater, you want it to be a certain size, or the neck hole of a sweater. You can use pins to stretch it to that size, and then when it dries, it'll hold that. And these are the blocking mats that we have available. If you do need to leave your project to dry overnight or for longer than you're going to be in the space, you can request a parking pass from one of the staff, and they will find a place where it can be safe to leave overnight and to dry. We have a multitude of different attachments and an assorted different tools that you can use on this machine. We have 2 different color changers for changing the color of your yarn as you're knitting. We have a ton of literature with patterns and books and how-tos on making things like beanies and sweaters. A lot of them are very cool. They're from the 80s and have some really retro style to them. There's a lot of different patterns that you can use for your knitting. If you're interested in using the knitting machine and you want to get a lot more information, everything I learned from the manual itself. This book tells you everything you need to know about how to set it up, how to cast it on, how to program your own patterns, what all the tools are used for, tips and tricks on how to make things work, how to adjust patterns. And this machine has an electronic memory that has pre-programmed patterns in it. We also have a book of those that are available, and you can flip through here, and the manual will give you instructions on how to load the correct pattern so that when you knit, it chooses the needles that give you that pattern. And there's lace patterns. Again, we have a lace carriage here, and there's also picture patterns where if you use different colored yarn, you'll get the effect of the pattern. To put the machine away, it's very simple. You undo all the steps you did to put it together. So you're going to take your yarn out of your mast, and you're going to take the mast out of the machine, and these all fold down together. And in the case, there's helpful photos that show you this Y matches right here. This is a number. This matches number 3. So this will go in the case right there. When you take this off, you just undo the finger screws. Again, this matches the picture in the case, number 4. You lay these down together, and this little arm comes down and tucks in everything really nicely. And then you put the lid, you put the arm down, you put all the tools away back in their boxes. And the lid fits back on the machine. So I'm going to put all of my needle pushers back in. I'm going to put all of my transfer tools back in here. And these live on the shelf. This has weights in it for various different reasons that you might need them. And this has a bunch of miscellaneous tools that you might find helpful when you're making intarsia or patterns or things like that. And the manual and the stitch pattern book both live in this folder box on the floor. And that is the MakeHaven Brother HK-930E electric knitting machine.